The pattern in the static, Chapter 1, The Gift. The television was a monstrous, walnut-veneered relic from the 1970s, a parting gift from the previous owner of the old Victorian house. Elias's girlfriend, Sarah, had wanted to throw it out immediately. "It's creepy, Eli. It looks like a dead robot's face." But Elias, a freelance graphic designer with a soft spot for analog oddities, had insisted. "It's got character. It's a piece of history. I bet it still works." Mr. Albright, the stooped, elderly man they'd bought the house from, had been vague about everything, his eyes constantly shifting around the empty rooms as if looking for something. "The house is quiet," he'd said, his voice a dry rustle. "But it likes a little noise. Keep it company." They'd laughed about it later. Now, as Elias wrestled the behemoth into his second-floor study, he remembered those words. One evening, while watching a movie on their modern LCD TV, the screen glitched for a fraction of a second. In that instant, Elias saw it, not the face, but the complex, fractal pattern from his notebook, superimposed over the actor's face. He looked at Sarah, but she hadn't noticed. She was absently scratching her arm. He knew then, with a cold, absolute certainty, they hadn't destroyed the signal. They hadn't closed the door. When he had pushed back with his mind, he hadn't turned the receiver off. He had turned it inward. The receiver was no longer the television. It was them. Their own minds, their own bodies, were now the sieve. The static was inside, a dormant signal waiting for the right moment to broadcast itself back out into the world, using their flesh and blood as its medium. They weren't free. They were the new broadcast, and the show was just on hiatus. There was a silent, concussive implosion of reality. He woke up on the study floor. Sunlight streamed through the window. The room was warm. The humming was gone. Sarah was shaking him, her face pale but clear of the static's influence. The rash on her arm was gone. "Eli, oh my God, are you okay?" The television stood silent and dark in the corner. It was just a piece of furniture again, a dead walnut-veneered relic. They both started laughing, a hysterical, relieved sound. They had won. They had the TV hauled away and crushed into a cube of scrap metal. Life slowly returned to normal. The horror began to feel like a bad dream. But weeks later, small things started to happen. Elias would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced he could hear a faint, high-pitched whine that Sarah couldn't. The lights in the house would sometimes flicker in a peculiar rhythmic pattern. A long, thin arm, composed of crackling black and white noise, emerged from the screen. It groped the air, its touch making the very light in the room flicker. Then another arm followed. The thing was pulling itself into their world. Sarah screamed and pulled Elias towards the door. But the doorway was rippling, the space beyond it distorting into a field of static. They were trapped inside the broadcast. The entity from the television tilted its head, a formless shape of pure, chaotic information, and focused on them. The drone of voices coalesced into a single clear sentence that echoed not in the room, but directly inside their minds. "We are here. Make room." Chapter 6, The Permanent Signal. Elias's last conscious thought was a desperate final act of will. He didn't try to fight the thing. He focused on the TV itself, the receiver. He poured all his fear, all his rage, all his love for Sarah into a single mental command: off. And the room was cold, freezing. "Elias," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with terror. He turned. The fractal rash on her arm was visibly pulsing, a faint, sickly light emanating from the lines. She cried out in pain, clutching her arm. On the screen, the vortex parted. The screaming face was gone. Instead, they saw a perfect, static-filled replica of their own living room. And in the replica, two figures made of shifting, buzzing static were standing, their forms slowly solidifying, becoming more real. The TV wasn't just a window anymore. It was a door, and something was stepping through. The choral drone swelled, resolving into a multitude of whispering, screaming voices, all speaking at once. The air in the study began to thicken, to buzz. The smell of ozone was overpowering. Elias grabbed a heavy bookend and hurled it at the screen. It should have shattered the glass. Instead, it passed through the surface as if it were water, disappearing into the static with a fuh. He held up his own arm, showing a faded, scarred version of the same fractal rash Sarah had. It uses your own mind, your own fears, to build a bridge. The more you watch, the stronger the signal gets. The face you see, it's not one of them. It's a warning. It's the last person it consumed. It's screaming for you to get out before it's too late. The video deteriorated into frantic static, and then the screen went black. Elias and Sarah sat in stunned, horrified silence. The old man's words, "It likes a little noise," now sounded like a death sentence. Chapter 5. The Broadcast. They decided to destroy the TV. They would smash it to pieces and burn it. But when they entered the study, it was on. It was still unplugged. The static on the screen was different. It was darker, thicker, and the frantic patterns had coalesced into a slow, swirling vortex. The low hum had deepened into a discordant, choral drone that seemed to vibrate in their bones. Inside the box was a single, yellowed VHS tape. There was no label. With a sense of mounting dread, they bought a cheap VCR from a thrift store and hooked it up to a modern LCD TV in the living room. They wouldn't dare use the old one. They slid the tape in. The screen showed a shaky, home video recording of Mr. Albright, looking much older and more frail than when they'd met him. He was sitting in the very study they now used. I don't know who you are," he whispered, his voice trembling. "But if you're watching this, you have the set. The receiver. It's not a television. Not really. It's a window or a sieve." He coughed, a wet, ragged sound. "The static, it's not emptiness. It's a place, a hungry place. And it's full of them, the lost ones. They're trapped in the noise, and they want out. They try to write themselves into our reality, first as patterns, then as images, then as flesh." "Okay," she said, taking his hands. "Okay, we're getting rid of it. Today." They went up to the study together. The unplugged TV sat silent. As they prepared to move it, Sarah's eyes fell on Elias's notebook, open to his sketches of the static patterns. "Eli, what are these?" "Just patterns I saw in the snow. Why?" She pointed a trembling finger at one of the more complex designs. "This looks exactly like the rash that's been on my arm. For the past week, the connection was undeniable. The swirling, fractal pattern on the paper was a perfect match for the red, raised marks on her skin." Chapter 4. The Invitation. Panicked, they decided to call Mr. Albright. The number he'd given them was disconnected. A visit to his new apartment revealed he had died peacefully in his sleep a month after moving out. The new tenant, a young woman, handed them a small box. He left this with the landlord, said if a young couple came asking, I should give it to them. He tried to research the house and Mr. Albright. The records were sparse. Albright had lived there alone for 40 years. His wife had died decades ago. There were no reports of violence, no dark history, just a quiet old man in a quiet old house. One evening, driven by a morbid curiosity, Elias went back to the study. He turned on the TV. The static roared to life. This time, the face didn't just appear. It moved. Its head turned slowly, and its hollow eyes seemed to lock directly onto Elias. The screaming mouth moved, forming a single silent word. Out. Elias stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. He fumbled for the power cord and yanked it from the wall. The screen went dark. He told Sarah everything the next morning. She listened, her face a mask of professional concern that slowly cracked into genuine fear. "Eli, this isn't a joke. You're seeing a face in the static that talks to you." "It said out," he insisted, his voice trembling. "It looked right." Elias jerked back, spilling his coffee. His heart hammered against his ribs. Pareidolia, his rational mind insisted. The human brain is wired to see faces in random patterns. He tried to dismiss it, but a cold knot of dread had tightened in his stomach. He turned the TV off. The room felt suddenly, profoundly empty. When Sarah came home, he didn't tell her. She was already stressed from work, and he didn't want to sound crazy. Chapter 3. The signal strengthens. The face became a regular, terrifying visitor. It would appear for a few seconds at a time, always screaming, always composed of that shimmering static. Elias stopped using the study at night. He started sleeping poorly, the hum of the TV seeming to seep through the walls, even when it was off. Chapter 2. The first face. Days turned into weeks. The TV became a background presence in Elias's study. Its soft hum and flickering light, a constant companion during his late-night work sessions. He started noticing the patterns more frequently. They were like faint, shifting mosaics hidden within the noise. He began sketching them in his notebook. Intricate, non-repeating designs that felt both alien and strangely familiar. One Tuesday, while Sarah was on a night shift at the hospital, Elias was working on a logo. The static from the TV was its usual white noise. He took a sip of coffee and glanced at the screen. A face stared back at him. It was gaunt, male, with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. It was composed entirely of the static itself, a negative space carved from the chaos. It lasted for less than a second, then dissolved back into the snow. After hours of fiddling, he found the power switch. The TV warmed up with a low, vacuum tube hum and a smell of hot dust and ozone. The screen glowed to life, not with a channel, but with a frantic, dancing black and white static. "See, it works," Elias said, triumphant. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Great, it gets snow. 100 pounds of snow." But Elias was mesmerized. The static wasn't entirely random. For a split second, he thought he saw a pattern, a fleeting, geometric shape that vanished as soon as he registered it. He chalked it up to his eyes playing tricks. That night, he dreamed of standing in a vast, dark space, the only light coming from the TV screen, which floated in the void.